Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Historically, renters are now staying in their units longer than before. You're going to learn about that tenant retention trend. Communities are almost waging war against short-term rental owners. During recessions, mortgage rates typically fall, and more counterintuitive facts about mortgages today on Get Rich Education. GRE listeners can't stop talking about their service from Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They've provided our tribe with more loans than anyone. They're truly a top lender for beginners and veterans. It's where I go to get my own loans for single-family rental property up to 4 plexes. So start your pre-qualification and you can chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. They'll even deliver your custom plan for growing your real estate portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com. If you're looking to grow your passive income from real estate, pay attention. My Property Stats is a deal analysis tool developed by an active investor to cut the time it takes to analyze any deal by over 90%. For any real estate class, you can calculate the exact price to pay to hit your cash flow and IRR goals. Build a world-class pro forma. Calculate the most you should pay for a renovation. Run multiple scenarios with a comparison tool and more. My Property Stats is the all-in-one toolkit for real estate investors. That means more deals, more cash flow, and more returns. Go to mypropertystats.com/GRE now and use the coupon code GRE to get 10% off your first year. That's just $90 a year for a tool that can save 10 hours per deal. No more spreadsheets, no more juggling multiple files. Use coupon code GRE to get 10% off at mypropertystats.com/GRE. Knowing the difference between a turnkey provider and a vertically integrated rental property company can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of your investment. Some companies sell you a property they don't own, renovate it with contractors they don't control, refer you to a property management company they don't manage, all in multiple markets because they can't source enough inventory. That's why truly passive investors work with our friends at JWB Real Estate Capital, perhaps the country's only vertically integrated rental property investment company. They operate in one market, Jacksonville, Florida, and their whole job is to make investing in rental properties easy for you. In fact, because of their vertically integrated approach, their clients have gained 79% more home price appreciation than the overall Jacksonville market since 2013. Find out more about why it pays to invest with JWB. Call them at 904-677-6777 or go to jwbrealestate.com/GRE.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Pittsfield, Massachusetts to where I am today, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. There are so many ways to invest in real estate. There's raw land. We don't talk about that very much here because raw land is not known for creating income, although there is actually a way to do that with seller financing. Now, investing in retail real estate like shopping plazas and malls and strip malls, that's something that we don't focus on either. It was already in a downturn, and then 2020's global health crisis took a further toll on retail, but nothing like the way that it vacated office space, of course. A lot of office spaces, including in some of the most blue chip U.S. cities, they still haven't bounced back. They still have a lot of vacancies. Office space is often going to get repurposed into something else. So that's raw land, retail, and office real estate. How about agriculture? That's something that we discuss here a little more, and it's often recession resilient. You can get an annual yield, income that you get from the crop harvests, and onshoring of agriculture, if that takes place, that could help somewhat with the supply chain and labor shortage problems. What about industrial and warehouse real estate? Well, now we're getting hotter. This onshoring, or really reshoring of the industry, as some call it, that's a market that's had substantially more vibrancy and at least discussion. But after almost 8 years of weekly shows here, unwaveringly, the real estate class that we discuss most each month and each year is, of course, residential. It's got this utility, which means usefulness, this utility that's durable. And this utility has actually increased since 2020. It's really picked up since then. The supply of residential stock has largely eroded over about the last 5 years. And as I'm fond of saying, as you can surely recite it with me by now, this era's housing crash, it already happened. It was a housing supply crash, not a price crash. That supply crash was centered in April of 2020. That's when the available supply of homes failed to make its seasonal rebound, and that supply crash is that hedge against any sort of housing price crash. The other reasons that GRE centers on residential is that it is highly financeable. And you know what? It's really easy for you or any beginner to understand, because you might have never worked in a field picking parsley or carrots or cilantro or tomatoes. You might have never interacted with agriculture that way. And you also might have just never had the displeasure of working in a big office and dealing with office real estate that way. But you have surely lived inside residential real estate, whether you've lived in a single family home or apartment or a condo, or even if you lived inside a cardboard box. The space that box was occupying is residential real estate. So that's a big part of what we do here at GRE, and the reasons why. As we know, in residential real estate, prices and mortgage rates and rents have all been up substantially over the past 2 years or so. Now, when it comes to you renting income property to others, I have discussed that upside, that torrid rent appreciation that America has seen lately. But what about protecting your downside? Now, what's your downside of rental real estate? Really, that biggest downside, I think you can say it starts with having vacancy and turnover. Yeah, if you have high tenant vacancy and turnover, a high churn rate, as we might call it, well, obviously that hurts your bottom line. While it's vacant and you aren't getting that daily prorated rent income, well, then you or your property manager might also have to deal with the expense of patching some drywall. Or that's the time that you might decide to replace the refrigerator. Or now that it's vacant, you decide that it's time to replace old vinyl flooring with some new hardwood laminate flooring. It's that vacancy and turnover time. Okay, so that's something that you want to minimize. Well, here we go. John Burns Real Estate Investing recently shared with us that more single-family renters than ever, or at least as long as they've been tracking this measure, they have been staying in place. And I'm going to tell you why this is happening in America and elsewhere shortly here. But first, let's talk about just how high these retention rates are getting. We learned that since 2016, retention rates have pretty much only gone one direction, up, up, up. In the United States. An astounding 77% of renters now renew their lease. That has just continued to go up. And again, that 77% is for single family rentals. Retention rates are lower in the apartment world. Over there, they're currently about 56%, the number of renters that are renewing their lease. Now, in the apartment space, RealPage, that source, they have divided retention rates into Class A, B, and C apartments. Of course, Class A are higher end, Class C are lower end. And here, we learned that among apartment dwellers, okay, just apartment dwellers, the highest retention rates are in Class C, and the lowest retention rates are in those nicer apartments, Class A. And when you think about it, that makes sense. Since Class A apartments are the nicest ones with the higher quality tenants, well, it makes sense that they would have the wherewithal to be able to move out of an apartment sooner since they're the ones more likely to soon become a homeowner and go buy their own home. So to review, tenant retention rates are way up for both rental single-family homes and for apartments. Overall, it has increased for years, year after year here. The reason it's 77% for single-family versus a lower 56% for apartments is because, of course, single-family rental homes, well, they tend to be more private. So families want to stay longer, and single families are also larger in size than apartments, and that makes it harder for moves. Single-family homes also tend to be in better school districts than apartments, so that is another impediment to transiency. Now, that doesn't mean that single-family rentals are always better. For example, apartment investing can have a scale advantage. Now, to give you some idea of how much more tenants want to hold on to what they've got and not vacate that rental unit, 5 years ago, single-family rental retention was 62%. And today, like I said, it is 77% in order to show you the growth in retention there. Now let's look at why. Why is this happening? Why is there the longer resident retention in these rentals? Well, tenants are staying put longer for three main reasons. And the first one is the obvious. Home buying costs have soared. Well, that's going to keep people renting. Secondly, at lease renewal, rental rates increase, but rents on vacant units are increasing even faster. So that's why tenants renew. And see, you know this sort of intrinsically as a landlord. You know that in high rent appreciation environments, like you're squarely in right now, you can often only get these small, incremental, little dinky rent increases on your existing tenants. I'll say maybe they're 5% or more. But see, you can often get these huge, big rent increases once you do have that vacancy and turnover on a new incoming tenant. You can get that 10% or 15% or even 20% or more today. So you still don't want vacancy and turnover, but that is kind of the upside of having a vacancy today. You can get a big rent increase, and you can do that even if you don't improve your property very much. And the third reason that tenant retention is up is due to this national paucity, this dearth of housing supply. Often, there is simply nowhere else for that tenant to move. There's just nowhere for them to go. And I have discussed housing's low supply at length before. I'm not going to do that today. And previously, I've also given you my best techniques for getting the greatest rent increase possible while ensuring at the same time that your tenant stays in your unit. I actually have a good video for that. I will put that YouTube video in the show notes for you, how to get the greatest rent increase possible while ensuring that your tenants stay in your unit, because that's been a really popular video. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't realize is, see, there should also be a substantial landlord motivation for you to increase the rent. It's a bigger motivation than a lot of people realize. Most real estate investors don't even know this. They've never thought about the fact before that a 10% rent increase can be perhaps a 20% cash flow increase to you, or even more than 20% just off a 10% rent increase if you're well leveraged. The short story on that is because your principal and interest payment stays fixed. And imagine you just extrapolating that effect across your portfolio, and you may very well be in the midst of this experience right now. That's how much more money you feel in your pocket every month. A 10% rent increase can be 20% more income for you. And yes, as a review, you learned that this particular wealth magnifying effect that I'm talking about is just one of three ways that real estate investors profit from inflation. Yes, those astute GRE scholars like you recognize that this is the third crown of the inflation triple crown, named cash flow enhancement. For a saver and consumer, inflation is their nemesis. But for you, a strategic debtor and a real estate investor, inflation is, of course, your friend. Now, I've got something really important to share with you when it comes to you raising the rent, and no one seems to talk about this, but intuition is telling me that this might help you. Now, as you and I know, emotions don't have a place in real estate investing, but if emotions are creeping in and you feel like you don't deserve to hike up the rent on your tenant, you gotta give yourself some credit. Yeah, give yourself some credit. Look, you aren't taking advantage of anyone simply for pursuing the going market rate. If you're providing them with good, clean, safe, affordable, and functional housing, it is an ethical transaction and you deserve it. Take the long view. And here's what I'm talking about. Did you sink a down payment into the rental property when you bought it? Yes, you did. The tenant didn't. What about that global health crisis that kicked off 2.5 years ago? You weathered that uncertainty. You took more market risk than your tenant did. You put more skin in the game than they did. They're short term, you're long term. And what else did you do? Years ago, you established a track record and a strong payment history in order to establish good credit for your loan in the first place. And you've taken your valuable time to educate yourself by listening to this show. So this is why I say give yourself some credit, raise the rent. If the market justifies it, you deserve it. So with that, let's talk about the mortgage market. Of course, the mortgage rates are up sharply since they bottomed out around the beginning of 2021, which was an all-time bottoming out. Though they're still not so common, we continue to see a bit more availability of 40-year loan products. Another top mortgage lender has rolled out theirs. Check out these details. Payments are interest only for the first 10 years of the 40-year loan. The lender, get this, the lender says that this loan is part of their Smart Series, yes, Smart Series of non-qualifying mortgage products. I'll tell you why I'm laughing in just a moment. Okay, but they say that this increases borrowers' purchasing power and allows for more affordable monthly payments. Okay, yes, those things would be true. All right, look, lenders want to try different things in a higher mortgage rate environment like this because for a lot of those mortgage companies, the refi business has dried up, okay? Because no one's out there hoping they can refinance to a higher rate, and mortgage companies need to stay in business. So now you've got a few, it's still not that widespread, you've got a few trying these 40-year loans. Now, the reason that I laughed that these are called the Smart Series loans is not that I think that these loans are bad. It's just that I think that critics are going to tear it apart, calling it the not so smart series or something like that. But as you, the longtime listener, know, just based on what I told you about this 40-year loan with 10 years of an interest-only period at the beginning, yes, I would rather have that on my own home or on a rental property than a plain vanilla 30-year fixed amortizing loan. And that is because, well, why would you or I put any dollars into principal when instead every dollar that you keep out of principal increases your cash flow by $1? You could go 10 years of only paying interest and no principal. Remember, on interest-only loans, you can make extra principal payments if you want to typically, but you just don't have to. So yeah, I would actually like that loan. I would like the 40-year loan with 10 years of interest only. See, financial freedom, that's achieved by you converting your equity into cash flow. You know that's true. So then why would you convert more cash into illiquid and zero return equity than you would have to? And you know, people in the mainstream media and old-fashioned consumer finance, people that want you to reduce your quality of life and get your hair cut by your spouse at home to save $20 and avoid buying lattes and deferring vacations, they want you to think that you have to live a life of less. That is not what we're doing here. We are here to grow your means, and they are not. Making unnecessary mortgage principal payments is an even worse idea in today's high inflation environment. I mean, that was a bad idea a few years ago, And it's even worse today. Why is that? Because inflation debases your equity and your debt at the same rate. So as long as cash flows are sufficient in your life, keep the debt on, because inflation debasing that debt enriches you, and keep your equity low because inflation debasing that harms you. Preaching to the choir, right? You know all that. There's a lot of counterintuition with mortgages. That is really just part of it. And one thing on that note that I'd really like to help you with is what I call the ROE versus the RFE. You've heard me talk about that before, but I just haven't quite put it in those terms. That's the return on equity, which is a real estate calculation, versus your return from equity, which is part really of a core GRE principle here. Your return on equity, well, hopefully that's a positive number. Call that your annual cash flow divided by the amount of equity that you have in the property. It's your return from equity that's always zero. That's another reason not to pay extra toward your principal. I want to, I suppose, help iterate that distinction for you, because at times I see people going out there in the world from listening to this show that they've learned somehow that the return on equity is always zero. Well, that's not correct. It's the return from equity that's always zero, because equity itself generates zero return. If you're a new listener and you're not initiated on that yet, that's because the presence or absence of equity has nothing to do with your property's appreciation rate. But yet if your property loses value, your equity is the first thing to be lost. It was hanging out there, exposed to the market. Yes, I am in Pennsylvania's second largest city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania today. I just got here a couple days ago. The confluence of the Monongahela and Allegheny rivers forms the Ohio River, hence the name Three Rivers. The city has a nice backdrop here with the Allegheny Mountains, which are part of the Appalachian Mountain Range. I'll be looking at a little real estate here in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, these next few weeks. But I'm hopefully here just to, well, live and visit family. Pennsylvania is where I was born, raised, and lived most of my life, and I still spend a good chunk of time here every year. But where I'm from is nowhere near Pittsburgh. It is about 4 hours to the northeast up in remote Potter County, Pennsylvania. That's where I'll be headed shortly. And then in a few weeks, I'll be in the cities of Reading, Pennsylvania, which is my birthplace, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I expect to see GRE marketplace provider Dave Zook, and later on to Philadelphia, which is Pennsylvania's biggest city and home of the Philadelphia Eagles football team. I like to travel. I am a geography guy. I often think spatially. I'm a real estate investor, but you often get these geography lessons from me along the way. Geography is basically real estate at a larger scale. My friend and I were chatting the other day, and it led me to do something that I've never done before here, speaking of travel, and that is count up the number of nations that I've visited. Nations that I've spent a substantial amount of time in and was not just passing through. And that number is 35. 35 nations that I have visited at this point. It's actually a few more than I would have guessed until I counted them up, but I still have so many to go. Hey, well, I've got some really counterintuitive educational teachings for you about mortgages. Is there an all-out war brewing against short-term rental property and more? That's next. I'm Keith Weinhold. You're listening to episode 416 of Get Rich Education. Hey, my friend Damian Lupo informed me that checkbook IRAs have been made illegal by the U.S. tax court. If you have a checkbook IRA, your holdings are now disqualified with taxes and penalties up to 50%. But don't panic, Damien and the EQRP company can fix this. Those IRAs can be converted into EQRPs retroactive to last year, getting those tax deductions and reducing your taxable income. In this way, you can invest your 401k or IRA in real estate, Bitcoin, gold, and even your own business. So whether you're a full-time investor or retired or even a dentist with dozens of employees, if you're listening, you qualify, the EQRP works. It's the solution. You'll control your money, kill UBIT, and pay way less taxes. To learn more about this strategy and free up your retirement money, Get the newest EQRP special report. Text GRE to 307-213-3475. That's text GRE to 307-213-3475. You can get a 50-year-old house somewhere or buy a new one directly from the builder with Tenant resilient amenities already built in. With over 3,000 Florida units at different construction stages, they are exclusively for investors. President Wagner Nolasco and team also invest strongly in their own product. That's belief. Start at build2rentdirect.com. That's build the number 2 rentdirect.com. Or text 407-927-5074.
This is JWB Real Estate Capital's Greg Cohen. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Hey, welcome back to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Yeah, there are a lot of counterintuitive notions around mortgages and mortgage interest rates. And let's update one of those. I shared with you before that higher mortgage rates typically correlate with higher home prices, not lower ones. Yes, in fact, rates have risen 1% or more 9 different times since 1994. And in those 9 stepped up mortgage rate environments, home prices rose in 7 of them. Now, part of it is that there's a lag effect to this, but not completely. Typically, but not always, rising rates are somewhat of a confirmation that the economy is doing well and can withstand higher rates and needs to cool off. The economy's condition is quite debatable right now, sure. But look, it happened again. What have home prices done since the beginning of 2021? They rose substantially and pretty sharply at times. And what have mortgage interest rates done since that time? They rose sharply too, underscoring that higher rates correlate with higher home prices. All right, but what about a recession? What happens during a recession? Well, during recessions, mortgage rates typically fall. Yes, a pronounced slowdown in economic activity tends to correlate with lower mortgage rates. Now, that should make sense, in fact, because if the economy is sputtering and there's a lot of unemployment, well, then the Fed and others, they would want to cut rates in order to spur new business growth and investment. That's just not quite intuitive to a lot of people, but that's generally the relationship there. Now, recently, I've been interviewed in the media, and one media source, they asked me what my future mortgage rate prediction is. Do I think that mortgage interest rates are going to go higher or lower? And I'm laughing because you know what I think about predicting mortgage rates or predicting most any interest rate? I'm going to let someone else do the guessing and be wrong, okay? Rates are really hard to predict, and they have a lot to do with what happens in the bond market and all these global macroeconomic forces that you just can't see coming. There are just too many variables and things that come out of nowhere on that. But you know what I like to say when it comes to these sorts of relationships that we're talking about here? Take history over hunches. Look at what's happened historically. Yeah, history over hunches. That premise, that guides a lot of what dots you can connect to see what variables correlate with each other. Like you can have this hunch that higher mortgage rates would mean lower house prices because affordability is down, but history shows you instead that they are positively correlated, higher rates and higher prices. Well, similarly, with looking at mortgage rate direction, I say history over hunches. Mortgage rates typical spread above the 10-year T-note is 1.75%. Well, lately, the spread has been wider than historic norms, meaning that mortgages are more than 1.75% above that bond yield. So that constrains mortgage rates from shooting up as fast in the future as they have earlier this year. At least for a time, that helps temper these mortgage rate increases. History over hunches. Look at relationships like that. In fact, I think it is easier to forecast home prices than mortgage rates. I will take a stab at forecasting home prices like I did last year for this year. Now, when it comes to prices, yeah, they have largely stalled. But the properties that we focus on here, those entry-level homes in the Midwest and South that make the best rentals, they are really resilient. They really stand up to any prices going down. Some economists predict that hot markets could see a 5% or more correction, and they're typically talking about things like a $500,000 home or a $900,000 home in a Boise or Austin or Phoenix or Denver, those hot markets with mid to upper mid-level homes. Well, we're not as interested in those somewhat trendy markets here. We're more in it for the production of income, although you might want to live in one of those places that I mentioned and invest somewhere else. One real estate trend that emerged a few years ago and seems to be gaining traction and really seems to have a lot of locals and NIMBYs getting heated and getting up in arms is this sort of war against short-term rentals in some markets, and you see more of these areas with restrictions against Airbnb and VRBO type listings. Truckee, California, which is this mountain resort town near Lake Tahoe. I spent a couple days in Truckee, beautiful. Well, Truckee made news earlier this year about paying up to $10,000 to lease property to locals rather than renting it to tourists. Well, all right, when locals no longer live in a town, the sense of community is lost. And also what happens is affordable housing options for people with mainstream workforce jobs, they start to dry up in these resort towns when short-term rentals take over. And therefore, it makes it hard for the restaurant to stay open when food servers can't afford to live in these newly desirable places. Yeah, I'm calling them newly desirable for a lot of these because, of course, the global health crisis and people realizing they can work on Zoom from anywhere is really what has fueled this. Moab, Utah, which is near spectacular Arches National Park and a place that my parents took my brother and I to as a kid. Well, some estimate that Moab's housing stock is now 70% short-term rentals. Sun Valley, Idaho, the famous ski resort area, it has so few housing options that workers are resorting to living in garages and eking out an existence in campers and tents. The New York Times recently reported that Sun Valley has a housing shortfall such that it is threatening to paralyze what was once a thriving economy and share a sense of community. Over there, the hospital, school district, and sheriff's office have each seen prospective employees bail on job offers that they had accepted after they realized that the cost of living in Sun Valley was just way too expensive. Short-term rentals hollowing out communities has been a popular and hot topic at a lot of community council meetings across the nation. Now, there are potentially some different ways of solving this. I don't know if the offering of short-term rental owners up to $10,000 to rent to locals is going to be a viable solution or not. We need to let that season a bit, I think. In Sun Valley, the fire department there, they've begun a $2.75 million fundraising campaign just to build housing for their firefighters. Now, I'm not necessarily against short-term rentals. I've got some mixed feelings about it. At GRE Marketplace, sometimes we offer these short-term rental properties. It needs to be understood that every short-term rental does not outclass a vital worker. Those are the stories that make the headlines. It often depends on that area, that local area, just like all real estate does. I will say, though, it is a shame that if someone that grew up in an area, they can't afford to live there any longer when they grow up. I mean, that's kind of sad. But I think in a lot of cases, that person that can't live in the area where they grew up, they don't have the programming, the mindset to grow their means with the type of concepts that we champion around here. When you open yourself up to an abundance mentality, look at the short-term rental destroying community conversation this way, okay? Just check this out. Listen to my thought here. Wealthy people, they don't need short-term rental income. Truly wealthy people, they can just buy a second or third vacation home and they don't need to rent it out. They don't need the income from that and have to manage a cleaning service and manage a listing and all that. Perhaps it's more upper middle income people that often have short-term rentals, and that's a socioeconomic class that is totally obtainable for you. A lot of blowback that I see against people resenting these short-term rental owners, they seem to be people that are envious, and oftentimes, not always, they seem to be these people probably with a scarcity mindset. And this is happening on the coast of Maine as well, Northwest Arkansas, on and on. A lot of places. College towns increasingly have this problem too. So a lot of times, workforce people, they have to make a 1-hour commute to commute into that hot touristy area where all the short-term rentals are. Seasonal rentals can leave no housing for the workforce. And I'm talking about really key people here. I'm talking about people that work in hospitals, in schools, and emergency services, like people that community needs. So we're talking about critical infrastructure here. And that is something that I feel sad about. Now, I mentioned a couple solutions that communities have come up with here. We'll see how they work. Another one is, workers can just simply refuse to work where they are not paid enough. And that is more of a free market solution. And another one is that taxes could be imposed on short-term rental owners. You could hike up those taxes, and then those revenues could provide more affordable housing options. That one is not so free market. I'm not necessarily recommending that one, but that's something that some could explore. But overall, my idea for you is to get on the right side of this. Real estate has made more ordinary people wealthy than anything else. This is good news. And much like I discussed in the first few episodes of this show back in 2014, and like I discussed again near the beginning of this episode today, it's that residential is the sector of real estate that has these positive market forces behind it for the next decade or more. And I'm focusing on today's trends and then turning them into ways where you can be successful. You know that old animated TV show, The Simpsons? It used to be on Fox. I don't know if they still run it. Maybe they have new episodes. I'm not sure. But I recently read an interesting anecdote about that show. It's that The Simpsons, they owned a home on a single salary from a husband, Homer, who didn't go to college. And this was considered normal in the 1990s when the show began. Well, that doesn't happen so much anymore, okay? Wages haven't kept up with inflation, meaning that both spouses have to work that way. So my point is, don't give in to that degradation in your quality of life and use real estate to benefit from some of these forces like inflation and like the boom in residential housing overall, whether it's short-term rentals or long-term rentals. You know, they want you to think out there that you can't do it. They want you to think you have to live a small life, but you don't. So if you're new to real estate or you haven't bought property yet, I would say start small and think big. Even if you put a single-family rental home or two in your portfolio, start small and think big. At GRE Marketplace, you can buy a good, renovated rental single-family home with a respectable tenant in it for a 20% down payment on a $180K property that someone else manages for you. You're not going to know unless you try it. Start small and think big. Some have said that the difference between investment and speculation is how much influence you have over the outcome. So grab the day by the turnkeys. You can't really wait until all 5 of real estate's profit centers are trending up. If you try to wait for that and get that just right, you're never going to get started. Right now, appreciation has stalled. Cash flow is going up with these increasing rents. Loan paydown is down due to higher mortgage interest rates. The tax benefits are about the same, and your inflation profiting benefit that you get from your debt is up. There. So right now, 2 are rising, 2 are waning, and 1 is the same. If you're looking to add rental properties to your portfolio, you can find the best nationwide providers at the same place where I buy my own property, GREmarketplace.com. We just added new providers in the Mid-South, and we're in the process of adding even more. So over there, create one login and access all the providers. It's truly free. There's no subscription cost. You can do that yourself right now. Alternatively, especially if you happen to be new and you want some help in getting started, like with an old-fashioned phone call or a Zoom call, email our investment coach. He's got both long-term rentals and short-term rentals. That's Naresh. Email him at naresh@getricheducation.com. I hope that you've enjoyed learning today. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.